and continue our conversation focusing on transportation and programs, in particular specialty programs, building off the enrollment conversation last time. And just to give you a preview of what's coming after this is we'll be talking next meeting in May around facilities. So that'll be the focus of the next meeting. And then after that, what we're going to be thinking about is how do all these different conversations start coming together and finding the through lines and connections between enrollment and transportation and programs and buildings. So today we're still sort of in the knowledge building phase, but we're going to go through a number of things. But really the bulk of today is going to be in conversation. So we'll start with just general introduction stuff. And we'll spend a little bit of time going through some landscape analysis around transportation and programs nationally. Hope you had a chance to watch recording, but if not, we'll go through it quickly today. And then we're going to focus on digging in specifically into MPS, looking at transportation and program data district-wide, but also specifically in the Northwest region. And then, like I said, the bulk of the time tonight will be in conversations that we'll break into groups. We may just want to combine into one group tonight unless other folks make their way in, and then we'll look ahead to the next meeting. So before we jump into the content, just a quick reminder, all the materials we're sharing tonight, previous meetings, all the notes, all of that is getting stored on the Google Drive. Hopefully everyone has been able to access that. Any issues accessing the materials? If you have issues, let us know, we can work you through it. But just a quick reminder that all the materials are being posted up on that Google Drive. And then as a reminder, we've been doing these community insights surveys, and I will say we're still, I think, in the early stages of this, but we're not getting a ton of input, but I'll let Lauren quickly summarize what we've heard so far from the last meeting.
So from the last meeting, we only really had one response from the Northwest region, so just a reminder, kind of using those outlets that you have in the community to kind of, if people want to answer those questions and get a little bit more insight to what you're doing here. But some of the main things from the enrollment process was the perception of safety and school performance was the lead driver for where parents were selecting enrollment from this one person, and then also a focus on accountability from the school board, general administration, and expressing a need for more transparency.
The folks that just came in, there's snacks in the back, some materials if you're hungry, and I'm Patrick Davis. I haven't had a chance to meet you all yet, but with Perkins fun. So again, looking forward to the conversation tonight. So we're just getting going, and for the folks that just came in, just a quick reminder, tonight we're focusing on transportation and programs. So we're going to dig into some of that content now. So hopefully everyone had a chance to watch the recording of some of this early sort of national landscape, but I'm going to give a quick run through tonight, focusing starting on transportation data nationally. Then, like I said, we'll dig into MPS and Northwest region specific data in a little bit. But transportation nationally, obviously, is a significant cost for school districts. On average, districts are paying about $1,152 per rider. And as you can see on the honeycomb map here, that varies obviously by state. So we're showing here statewide, where we see places like DC that's heavily urban, having higher costs. The average rider cost in the state of Wisconsin is much less than the national average, around $558 per student. It's about 2022 data, so a little few years dated, but generally you can see the state as a whole is a little bit is about half of the cost of the national average. With that said, specifically here in MPS, the costs are much closer to that national average of around $1,100 per student transported. There's a number of reasons. We talked a little about this last night, but just to sort of, and I'll let David correct me if I go awry here, but generally there's obviously differences here in Milwaukee compared to the rest of the state. Things like special education population and ridership is a significant cost. Homeless student transportation, so McKinney-Vento, which is a requirement for transportation, and then just the general cost of sort of the movement of students in the choice number here in the state. But generally, transportation is about 4.1, a little over 4% of the overall MPS budget, and approaches close to $65 million per year. So, significant cost, obviously something that the district always wants to think about in terms of efficiencies, so that money is always going back into the classroom where possible. So just to give you sort of the framing of what transportation is in Milwaukee. There was a lot, we just included this because obviously it was part of the national conversation over the last few years. There was a lot of impact during COVID of bus driver shortages and how that impacted operations, costs, the ability to staff buses and to make sure kids could get to schools on time. Nationally, there were challenges with that. In fact, many districts had to close schools in some cases because of lack of bus drivers. It's important to note that things are changing a little bit, where MPS certainly felt that, like the rest of the country did, and Wisconsin in general did. But generally, that is becoming a less and less of an issue as there's been hiring efforts and the ability to hopefully get closer to fully staffed drivers. So, while it was a big topic of conversation, is becoming less and less of an issue. With that said, it certainly made some changes in terms of travel. This is not the main driver for some of these changes, but how students are getting to school have changed a lot over the last number of years. So this graph's a little bit confusing. The x-axis down here is showing ages, so 6 to 7-year-olds to 16 to 17-year-olds. We can see the mode of transportation nationally that families and students are taking to school. And the lighter line here is 2017 behavior, and the darker line is 2022. So what we've seen is generally across all ages, a decline in school bus ridership. And we've seen an increase in private vehicle ridership, where families are now opting more than they were to drive private vehicles to school when they had the ability to do so. Public transportation went up and down a little bit, but generally remained flat. There was a little bit of an increase in older kids biking and walking to school, a little bit of a decrease at younger age, but generally we're seeing more and more of a shift nationally away from public school. This is 2022 data, so we'll just see how things change, but generally there's been some movement in terms of mode of transportation around the country. With that said, the changes are not uniform across all populations. So what we're showing here is the graph on the left is showing educational attainment of at least one parent in the household. So where a single parent in the household has a bachelor's degree or higher, there is typically more of a reliance on private vehicles, and school buses obviously go down. Where that's not the case, where a parent does not have a 4-year degree, it's a lot closer, where the percentage of students taking the school bus and private vehicle is actually pretty close to equal. So as we think about some of these changes, it's important to recognize, we can't think about this in terms of broad brush and say, oh, everyone's taking private vehicles now. There's a lot of factors, obviously availability of vehicles and access to private vehicles is part of it. But it's important to think about these things a little more nuanced than some of these sort of big national broad brush trends. And then, as I mentioned, there's been a lot of thinking about transportation. It's always something that districts want to make sure we're, doing well and efficiently. Districts are starting to think about alternative ways to provide transportation, whether that's trying to optimize or be more really efficient with how routes are developed. So districts like Colorado Springs are starting to really lean into new technology and artificial intelligence to figure out, are there ways to be really nimble and efficient with buses, or things like carpool services. So Chicago's over the last number of years has launched some carpooling networks. So again, trying to think a little bit outside the box and into alternative methods for transportation. MPS has been going through some changes on their own. First, they've launched some publicly available apps to help track buses, which is obviously great for parents, but also the school bus, the start times are changing. So the MPS currently has been continue to operate with a 3-tier system. So you've got a morning bell schedule, sort of middle bell schedule, not a later bell schedule that allows for efficient use of buses. But many of these moves were largely in part to ensuring students can get to school on time and have appropriate attendance in school. So there are some shifts in terms of bell schedules. We can have some conversation around what that means for parents and school selection, but generally keeping the 3-tier structure, but some shifts in the bell schedules to allow for more time and ensure students can get to school on time, but also especially at the secondary level through the entry procedures into school as well. So thinking about attendance and the value of attendance. So pivoting a little bit or a lot of it into specialty schools. So the next few slides, we're thinking about the programmatic side of the conversation tonight. Obviously, we'll talk about how these things are connected, but specialty schools are something that really started in the 1970s, and the intent was to integrate schools in many ways and stop some of the desegregation that many districts were facing. MPS, really started this in 1976. We'll start to see some of the growth of specialty programs. With that said, while the intent was to integrate, it hasn't always resulted in the anticipated outcomes. Nationally, as of 2018, 1 in 6 public school students still attends a school that has 90% of their peers that share a similar racial background. So, we have really high proportions of single race schools still around in the country. And certainly we see that here in Milwaukee as well. So obviously there's benefits of specialty school we'll talk about, but the intent early on was to think about how to integrate and desegregate schools. But nationally, with that sort of history, we've started to see significant rises in specialty schools. So for example, Montessori schools have been steadily rising since the 1970s. With significant jumps in the 90s and 2000s, and it's continuing to rise right now in 2024. A year ago, there were 5,000 Montessori schools in the country. MPS happens to be one of the national leaders with Montessori school offerings, and we'll talk about where they are across the district in a little bit. But growth of things like Montessori programs have been on the rise. Same thing with dual language programs. The dual language programs have essentially tripled over the last 10 to 15 years. So again, there seems to be demand for some of these specialty programs around the country. Of those dual language programs, roughly 80% of them are Spanish speaking, 8.6 are Chinese or Mandarin. And then obviously there's some variations here in Milwaukee. There is examples of some of those other languages. But generally this is something that has been growing pretty significantly over the last number of years and seems to be continuing to grow with demand for programs like this from families. Another program which MPS has also been sort of experiencing growth in, which is international baccalaureate programs. So again, IB programs have been increasing significantly, 34%. From 2020 just to 2024. So even in that short time period, the demand for programs like an IB program have increased around the country, with obviously some of the states here on the upper of the plot increasing more, but generally around the country, we see more and more things like IB programs being offered around the country. And then same thing with CTE programs or career technical education. So many of us, when we were going to school, vocational schools, things like that, obviously things have changed, and they are now career tech, which go beyond trade programs and offer business degrees and things like that. But generally, these are also have been rising, specifically at the secondary level. And the plot here, I won't go through all of it, compares the different types of pathways or program offerings that exist in the Metro Milwaukee area versus the rest of the state of Wisconsin. Generally, Milwaukee, there tend to be more business information technology programs are leaning into some of that IT and tech industry as well. And then generally, we have seen nationally just a change in terms of the landscape. So we've started to see fewer and fewer neighborhood assigned schools. That's been on the decline. As we just talked about, an increase in publicly chosen specialty schools. This is a little bit old. I will say private school and home schools really jumped up during the pandemic So this graph may change a little bit as we start to pull out of the COVID-19 pandemic. But generally the trend of neighborhood assigned schools has been steadily decreasing, again, with this sort of idea of creating choice systems across the country. And obviously MPS has embraced that choice environment as well, which we'll talk about here in a second. So that's sort of just the national landscape. We're going to spend the next few minutes just sort of laying a foundation for what's happening specifically at MPS, and then also very specifically some northwest region data.
Can we ask, is there time?
Yeah, go for it.
So
Please.
I just have a question about the percentage of cost for private schools. So that was like something that I was completely unaware of. I work in the district. I had no idea that we pay for busing for kids to go to private school. So you were saying that the percentage of the budget that is for transportation is 4.1%. Like how much of that is for kids that don't attend our schools?
David, roughly.
Hi.
David Pfeiffer, Director of Business Transportation Services. Right now, and it's pretty open door because schools can elect to participate. Long story short, Milwaukee Public Schools, as the LEA, is responsible for any Milwaukee residents that attends a public or private school. Some private schools participate, some private schools don't participate in this reimbursement program. Currently, we spend about $2.5 million. So
On private schools.
on private school transportation. So out of the $65 million, it's about $2.5 million. And that becomes important because depending upon policy at the local level, at the district level, it may impact how we pay out for private schools. So our policies have a impact on how we interpret because of something called reasonable uniformity of the law. So the more we change, the more we may have to change the way that we pay out and the quantity of dollars that we pay out to private schools. But as it stands right now, it's a relatively smaller proportion, given the number of private schools that are in the Milwaukee area.
I will say nationally, that's not the norm. Where
So
the
that's my
local-
next question, like,
yeah.
is that a Wisconsin thing?
It is partly, it is very specific to Wisconsin state statutes. So they built
Because of our,
in
like,
some
choice.
legislation. Yeah.
Legislation.
And it was built before, lift the cap. So there was a point in time when the cap of private schools was lifted and this
Yeah.
legislation has been in effect for 50, 60, 70 years without much modification at all.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So is the 2.5 million, is that pretty like stable? Does it seem like it's increasing?
It's been relatively stable. I mean, it has gone up. As our costs go up, their costs go up.
Or like proportionally the same?
Correct. It's been relatively
Okay.
proportional.
And
More
while,
questions?
I'm sorry,
Okay.
no, go for it. Yep, no, go for it.
Mine was a different topic.
I'll just say, I mentioned nationally, it's not the norm to do that. I will say voucher programs across the country are starting to become more of a conversation. North Carolina last year just launched a massive voucher program. Texas has it on the ballot this year. So there may be transportation components to some of these voucher expansions as well. So while Wisconsin in many ways for the birthplace of voucher programs, they have started this, but it may become more common. Just saying, historically, it has not been normal for the LEA to pay for private school transportation
Okay.
or charter school, to be honest.
And then in terms of the app that rolled out,
Mhm.
what's the usage look like right now?
It's still relative. We got about 2,000 students
Okay.
out of, in any given year, between 35 and 40,000 riders.
Okay.
So it's a phase-in approach. Obviously, part of this is making sure that families understand how to do it, because you can't just get the app. You have to go through you have to sign up. We were trying to incentivize parent portal usage, so you look at your report card, your grades, and then you can get the app, not just get the app.
Okay. Okay.
But it's expanding, and so we, obviously, as we just rolled out, and then I want to take, we can obviously break this up into smaller groups too, but the plan is really a targeted increase between now and June, so that when we roll out in the fall, hopefully we'll have very close to 30,000 or whatever our ridership looks like in the fall. So it's incrementally increasing between now and June.
Okay, thanks.
Cool.
All right, I've got a few more sort of just foundational data slides, and then we're gonna spend, like I said, the bulk of our time in conversation. So many of you may have seen this before, just be familiar with some of this data, but as a starting point, it's important to recognize that most families in MPS are not choosing their neighborhood school. Roughly only 16% of elementary school students are opting into their neighborhood school, 14% at the K-8 level, 16% middle school, and then down to 11% for high school. So obviously there's this choice system that's been very much part of the culture where families are not, in many cases, not opting into their neighborhood school. I will say nationally, this is, especially in urban areas, we do see low participation rates, but this is probably on the lower side from what we see around the country in districts we've been working with. You know, used to seeing more to 30 to 40% participation, and obviously there's variation from school to school, but district-wide, this is a little bit of a lower number in terms of neighborhood participation in their school. And just to, I know the next graphic will be a little cleaner and easier to read, but just to start thinking about where students are moving. So the way to read this plot, and we'll leave it obviously with materials, you can dig into it more, but there's 8 school board districts in MPS. So what the way to read this is on the y-axis here is districts 1 through 8 where students live. The x-axis is where they're attending. So for example, in school, if you live in school board district 1, 47% of those students that live within that school board district are attending a school in that school board district. The most interesting thing I think out of this is District 2 generally has fairly low participation in the school board district region, but generally obviously we think of the Northwest, but I think it's important for everyone's sort of citywide context. There's a lot more north to south movement than there is south north, which I think is probably, most of you are probably aware. Generally, students that live in 6, 7, and 8 don't go to school north of District 6. So many of those students are staying down south, while there's a lot more movement south from districts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If we roll this up a little bit into a little bit of a cleaner number for the different school board districts, and there's maps, they're starting school board districts, planning regions. The maps are up on the wall, but for the Northwest region in general, so the big green area on the maps, 61% of the students that live within this region are attending a school in the Northwest region. It sort of puts it right in the middle. The Southwest is capturing about 77% of their students, and then the Central region is capturing 42% of the students. So, you know, a little more than half or 60% of the students are staying within Northwest region. That also means 40% of students are attending school outside of this region. And obviously that sort of mobility, we think about the travel distances, how far are students going. Generally, this is a fairly consistent trend we see across the country, but students travel further as they grow through school. So typically at the elementary level, grades 1 through 5, students are traveling 2.2, 2.3 miles. Middle school grades, they're typically traveling 2.7, 2.8 miles to get to school, and then high school right around 4 miles on average to get to school. But when we start thinking about that here compared to what's happening traveling to schools in the Northwest region, the blue bar here are the Northwest region travel distances, so traveling to schools in the Northwest region. We see that in general, students are traveling further at every grade up to grade 8. So they're traveling further to get to schools that are offering grades 1 through 8, but then we see a lower number than these district average, so we're traveling shorter distances to get to high schools, which is interesting. And then just to break that down a little bit further, so these are just histogram buckets, but generally the x-axis here is just how many percentage of students that are traveling within sort of distance threshold. So 37% of the students that live in the Northwest region travel less than 2 miles to get to school. 54% of those students live within 2 to 6 miles, and then 9% of the students that live in the Northwest region are traveling more than 6 miles to get to school. So thinking about the programs and perhaps why many families are traveling all around the city, and certainly even within the Northwest region, as a starting point, just sort of laying the foundation for different grade types. MPS offers a wide variety of different grade configurations at schools. The predominant grade type is pre-K to 8. That's the highest number of schools. Pre-K 5 to 5, so traditional elementary grades being the second most prominent, and then traditional high school There's 29 traditional high school grade band schools. There are very few traditional middle schools. There's only 7 schools that are the traditional 6th through 8th grade. Obviously, with the increase or the high number of pre-K to 8 schools, you're going to see fewer traditional middle schools. But again, when we start to look at how the different grade bands compare here in the Northwest region, we do see some differences. So this plot is showing the percentage of schools by grade type. So we can start to see there are fewer pre-K to 8 offerings in the Northwest region compared to the percentage across the district. And sort of obviously you'd expect, we see more pre-K to 5 offerings percentage wise here in the Northwest region compared to the district averages. So obviously some differences with the different grade types and school offerings that exist within the Northwest region. There are fewer high schools proportionally in the Northwest region compared to the rest of the district. And then the rest are fairly small numbers, but generally the biggest difference is more pre-K to 5 schools in the Northwest region compared to the district averages, fewer pre-K to 8 schools than the.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, with the pre-K to 5, is the goal in the Northwest region to have or expand, so it's more pre-K to 8?
I don't know that there is an express goal. Honestly, that might be part of the conversation we have tonight. I just want to make sure people sort of understand the current landscape. You know, there is some differences from region to region in terms of what's offered to families or what's available to
Because
families.
the pre-K to 8 that's offered in other regions, are those mostly specialty programs like Montessori?
We'll talk about
language?
special, not always, but we'll dig into that in a little bit. I will say, and David, Michelle can correct me if I'm wrong, there was a lot of sort of pre-K to 8 conversions, especially in the sort of central part of the region during the Neighborhood Schools Initiative was a big change about 20 years ago. So there were some areas of the city that went through pretty transformational change in terms of grade type, where that may not have impacted the Northwest as much.
Okay.
But we do see varying sort of degrees across the city, so it's been interesting to look at, but.
A lot of schools switch from a K-5 to a K-8 to increase their enrollment and maintain their budget.
Yeah, there's a lot of national conversation about middle schools versus pre-K to 8. Happy to talk more about it, but there's pros and cons to both. I don't know that there's a magic answer, but there is obviously just a difference in terms of what's being offered here compared to the rest of the district. Did you have a question, Tina?
No, it's just.
Well, I know he had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Do you have any info about closures of schools? Cause like, I know on the Northwest side, I'm thinking like Happy Hill, Emerson, like there was middle schools and K through 8s on the Northwest side that should make this look more normal. They have been shuttered in the past 20 years. Is there anything about that you guys have looked into? Because it is the only side of town where they shuttered middle school spaces. And I know this because I work in a middle school where like this week we got like 11 wonderful charter and voucher babies and other misbehaviors. And the answer is there's no other middle school seat in the world for them. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh, is it because we're the side of town where everybody needs a middle school? There's one middle school and no K through 8s.
Yeah.
I bet you would go to my school.
Yeah. I don't know, Michelle, do you have any history on the closures?
So we were just kind of comparing notes here, so in the Northwest area, I know there was, near closed. Yeah, Burroughs closed, and that was a middle school, and then we also closed, what was Granville and Pepperville. So those were 2, elementaries that closed in that area.
But there were also middle schools on the south side and central that closed, because there were 21 middle schools.
Yeah, it used to be a traditional pre-K to 5.
Edison closed.
Middle school and everything.
Jackie Robinson, Walker,
Yeah.
Shoals.
So,
Yeah.
but here, that's it. But like my question then is that I'm imagining all those school buildings and I can also tell you what school building they are now, right? Like Fritchie is part, I can continue that. But like many of the schools on this side of town that we're listing are housing or vacant or charter or something else now, right? Like
So.
like Happy Hill is some.
Happy Hill is vacant, that's an elementary, the original Morse.
That's
building
Hoppa.
Is now owned by Hoppa.
Burroughs is Morris.
Burroughs is no Morse, very confusing, and,
Webster is Green.
Green Tree, Green Tree Prep, so it's not it's a 6-8, 6-12.
Cool.
So yeah, there's a lot of change in there.
Yeah, we can try to bring some of that history in here. I will say, I'd love to keep this conversation, we're gonna break into groups and we can start thinking about, and then please ask away. I didn't mean to say that was a bad question, or I just wanna make sure we get through some of this, but I think we can talk about some of the implications of these things and honestly, your experience hearing about receiving of charter school students is interesting. So, just to quickly dig into some of the specialty programs that you asked about. So generally, 65% of MPS schools across the district offer some form of specialty program. That could be a whole school model, or it could be a pathway that exists, or program that exists within a school. I will say there's a handout in the back that defines each one of these program types, if you're not familiar with all of them, but generally we're looking at AP programs or advanced placement, arts focused schools, bilingual, college support, community schools, CT pathways, or especially at secondary schools, dual enrollment schools, ESL programs, gifted and talented schools programs, IB programs, language immersion, Montessori, and then project lead learning. So there's definitions in the back, but generally these specialty programs are offered at more than half, or 65% of the schools within MPS. When we start to look at the distribution of those programs across the region or across the city, we can see by program type the percentage of specialty schools offered by each of the 4 regions we've broken up into. So Northwest is in this orange color, where generally, I will say, there are fewer numbers of the specialty programs offered in Northwest compared to areas like the Southwest and the East region. So generally, most of the program offerings are less than 25%. So if you're thinking just magically, if everything is divided evenly across the board, you see 25, 25, 25. Obviously, it doesn't work like that, but it's sort of a mental barometer. We can start to see that most of the program types are less than 25% or somewhat close to it. I will say the gifted and talented is a little misleading. There's only 2 of them across the district, so there's 1.
And one of us does not get any gifted and talented services.
I would say IB is something that is quite low. There's only 9% of the IB offerings in Northwest, and then say Montessori is on the lower side. So generally, fewer and fewer specialty programs offered in the Northwest compared to other areas of the city. And then just, I know this is a little bit confusing graphic, but I'm just trying to think about sort of travel distance and demand. So the way to read this, the x-axis is travel distance. So the further you are to the right means on average students travel further to get to those programs. And then the y-axis here is utilization. So let's just look at IB. So generally students are traveling on average about 4 miles to get to an IB program in the district. An IB program, IB schools that have IB programs are generally well attended and have high utilization rates. On the other side, like a program like a community school, on average students are traveling shorter distances, less than 2.5 miles. And those schools tend to have a little bit lower demand and lower utilization rate. So I won't go through all of them, but generally you can see there's tends to be high demand, high travel distance for IB programs. Montessori, bilingual tend to be in schools that have higher utilization rates, which may signal some of the demand for programs like that. So with that, we just went through a lot of data, but hopefully, and we can certainly flip back as we go through the conversation if you're interested. But like I said, we're gonna spend the bulk of tonight in groups and talking through some of these things. So we're gonna go through, we have printouts of these questions so you can have at your table. But we're gonna break into, I guess maybe if we could just combine, these 2 tables here, but 3 different groups and just have some conversation around some of the data. I will say, as much as we can go through these, great. If it sort of spur off into a different conversation, they're meant to be just conversation starters in many ways. But we want to talk a little bit about transportation and program access and what that might mean here in the Northwest region and thinking about the district as a whole. So the first question is generally, how does transportation influence school selection? Are there strategies that could be considered to equitably reduce reliance on transportation while also thinking about being efficient with costs? How can MPS better leverage Milwaukee city resources to support school transportation? Obviously, the benefit of being in the city is leveraging some of the existing city infrastructure. So are there partnerships that could be better used? Maybe that's it's come up in the last 2 conversations. better use or sort of reliance on county bus system? Are there partnerships for safe passage? I will say we've heard in student conversations, many times students feel like they're selecting school or using transportation because they don't always feel safe walking to their school. So districts like Washington DC and others have really invested in partnerships with other city agencies to support safe passage from major transportation centers. So that's a potential partnership idea.
Can you give an example of like what does that mean? I mean, I know what that means, but
Yeah.
what does that look like in DC?
Yeah, so they partner with, they have a group called violence interrupters that are hired, that are stationed on high transport areas. So if there's key sort of bus stop locations that are transfer spots, they have a high number of adults that are there to supervise, de-escalate when needed,
Okay.
support students. There's partnerships with the Metro Police Department to increase a training for those police officers, but also especially during pickup and arrival and dismissal times, they increase presence. Same thing with the general police department. So it's sort of a citywide effort to make sure students feel safe going to and from school, both from other students, but also the broader public.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Number three, thinking more about the programs, obviously we saw the sort of significant increases over the number of years on specialty programs. So thinking about, if MPS was to consider more, what are the factors that could be considered and shape how MPS launches new programs? How do they understand and sort of evaluate the sustainability of those programs? Like, is there a process to evaluate, are they working, are they delivering what they say they are? 4 is thinking about, again, that balance of specialty programs. Is there a right mix of specialty programs versus just traditional, neighborhood schools? And then number 5, again, thinking about, those neighborhood schools and how there's a lack of participation in there. What are those key elements that could define an excellent neighborhood school? Or what are the things that would drive more families to select a school in their neighborhood? And then number 6, generally, are there policy things that could be considered to address transportation and program access challenges? Are there innovative or outside the box approaches that MPS should be thinking about? So a lot here. If you don't get to everything, it's okay. Again, many of these are meant to spark conversation. They can go a few different directions. So I'll pause and see if these generally make sense, and then we'll break into groups. We'll have a few MPS folks in our team.
Yeah, 3, 3, and 2.
Yeah, I was gonna, if you don't mind, sorry to make you pack up and move. So we'll bring around a few experts. I will say David is a wealth of knowledge on the transportation front. There's gonna be circulating around. So if you have questions as you're going through some transportation conversations, obviously just raise your hand, and I don't want to put too much on David, but he, I think, will be more than happy to come over and answer questions. So with that, we're gonna break into groups.